You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. I am your host, of course, Michael Cohen. And oh boy, you guys, you're in for a treat. This is a great episode. We're a little off the beaten path. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the episode proper. But we're talking about something not quite as current, not quite as pop culture, not in our usual, Star Wars, DC, Marvel, adjacent sort of world. I mean, we've had some pretty interesting picks thus far with Perfect 10, and I also sort of think back to the stuff that we've done on ThunderQuack podcast that we've talked about, like the Matrix movies, and obviously all of the Star Wars and DC and Marvel stuff that we covered over the years on that, which is my usual sort of like that's kind of the lane that I stay in. That's the zone, right? But the great thing about Perfect 10 is that I get the opportunity to talk to really cool, really interesting, really smart people, and just invite them onto the show to share something that they love. And if we're doing our jobs right around here, then that love will translate over and give you guys, as well as me, something new to love every once in a while. And that's the instance here. We're going to talk about the movie Roman Holiday, which is an older film, black and white. So we're really, really outside the comfort zone this time around. And I am so grateful to our guest, Missy, for coming on and talking about this movie, and basically like getting me to watch something that I've never watched, and to, like I said, step outside that comfort zone. It's really easy to talk about those 80s and 90s things, even the early 2000s things that we've sort of been centered around, and the stuff that comes to mind, the stuff that's so easy to think of when we think of what a perfect 10 would be. But this one definitely gets us to stretch our legs a little bit, and it's a great conversation. Missy is such an amazing person. She is so smart. She is so knowledgeable about this fairy tale stuff, and it was just such a pleasure to have this conversation with her about something, again, that she loves. Like just that joy comes across right from the get-go. And so I mean, I guess there's not really much else to talk about, sort of in the rigmarole and all that housekeeping or whatnot. We've got some other guests lined up, and I'm actually not really sure who's going to be next on the schedule. This month was actually originally going to be Kyle, and we were going to talk about Rings of Power, but then I messaged Missy, and as has happened several times with the podcast so far, the timing just worked out really well. We both had availability on this past Sunday morning, and whereas during the week I was a little bit swamped, so Kyle and I had to postpone anyway. So it worked out perfectly, and it was a great opportunity. So just kind of meant to be. It feels a little bit kismet in that way. But yeah. So I know like Kyle and I are gonna do Rings of Power soon. I know that Marie Claire, from What the Force wants to do Stardust. So that's another one that's on the list. And there's a few other people who are sort of waiting in the wings as well that aren't quite. I'll tease you guys right now. Joe is also coming back. Joe Hogan, who is one of my co-hosts on Rebel Cells and hangs out with me to do the live action Star Wars stuff. We did Book of Boba Fett together, and we're gonna do Mando together, and we're gonna do an episode in May. There's a pretty big video game release coming out in May. A new video game that both of us are very excited about, and we're gonna go back and we're gonna talk about a classic from that franchise. So that one is scheduled. That one's scheduled to the day. We already know when we're recording. So look forward to that. I'm very much looking forward to that episode. So I'm gonna keep teasing it. I'm not gonna tell you guys exactly what we're talking about. I'm just gonna drop some clues in this episode and maybe the next two, because we'll have March and April between now and then to tease out some stuff. I'll also just mention, I mentioned it in the episode at the end, but I'm going to mention it up front here as well. Tim Dipple is crushing it with the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 pop quiz. It's amazing. He nails it every single episode. His trivia questions are the perfect complement to the conversations that we're having. And the thing is that he and I do not coordinate. I don't tell him anything about what we talk about. I just give him the topic, and he goes and does his research, and has just put together such perfect episodes. Almost every question that has been asked in a ThunderQuack Perfect 10 pop quiz has been covered in the episode about that topic, and that has just been, again, kismet, serendipity. It's working. It's just working, and that is Tim. That's all Tim. So just so you guys know, he writes, records, produces the whole thing all on his own. He just sends me an MP3 and I put it up on Patreon, and I am so grateful for that. He is such an awesome collaborator to work with, and so I just wanted to give him a big shout out before we get into it for this episode, because this one's going to be a challenge for him. We definitely are setting a new bar for that Perfect 10 pop quiz. So that's something that you can get over on Patreon. Right now it is at the $10 level. I am considering bringing it down to the $5 level. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of thinking about everything just being at $5 across the board. That's a thought that I've just had, of just like simplifying Patreon to where, now if you're already a subscriber and you're already at that $1 level, then you'll continue to get the same benefits that you've gotten. Like I'll grandfather everybody at those levels and make sure that you're still getting the early episodes and whatnot, for sure. But new subscribers going forward, I think I'm gonna just bring everything. So you're gonna get the episode early, you get off the record, and you get the pop quiz all at the $5 level. And it'll just be the one thing. And then Patreon producers at $20 a month. Which right now we just have the one Patreon producer. We've just got Brian Murowski, our awesome Patreon producer. So, who has been a Patreon producer for such a long time. It's amazing. Yeah, I think I might just kind of have those two tiers, just to simplify things and make sure that as many people as possible are getting access to the pop quiz and off the record, as we can manage, because I think that both of those things are great. So that is gonna be it. I'm gonna let you guys get into the episode with Missy. If you want to check out more of Missy's awesome thoughts on genre stuff, I cannot suggest she'll give like her sort of her credentials and everything, and where you can find her in the episode. But I'm just gonna shout out, as I always do, What the Force. Any episode that Missy is on is an episode worth digging into, because her and Marie Claire have just such a good rapport, such a good back and forth. And I think they really bring out the best in each other. And so that's one of the reasons why the recent following Willow um, episodes have been so special, along with the fact that show has just been a, a, a treat, a treasure, just the best show ever. So I go check out Missy on What the Force. Go check her out on social media. She gives all of her links and stuff in the episode itself. And here it is, Missy and I talking about the movie Roman Holiday. Enjoy. Okay, let's get into this one. This is a departure. This is exciting for me because this is not our usual fare. But that's the whole point of Perfect 10, is that there's no such thing. There's no such thing as our usual fare. I'm really excited to have with me on this episode Missy, designer, lifelong Star Wars fan, and fairy tale nerd. You might know her from What the Force, because I am constantly recommending that everybody go listen to What the Force. In particular, the most recent batch of episodes, the following Willow series of episodes for that, because you guys all know how obsessed I am with that show. Missy, it is so awesome to have you here. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I was surprised and excited, and glad that I think I was able to bring you a bit of a surprise as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So we're talking about a movie on this episode. That movie is Roman Holiday. And yeah, like I said, this is not our usual fare. We usually are in that pop culture zone, right?
Hmm.
But and like we've done some off the beaten path stuff, like we did Lore Olympus, which I think is a little bit more of a niche thing. It's a little bit more underground at the moment. It won't be for long, I promise that to everybody. Eventually Lore Olympus will have a TV series, and like it'll be, everybody will know what it is because it's so good. But like, go back to listen to that episode with me and Marie Claire. But I but this is, we're digging back into the past with this one. So
Hmm.
let's get like right into the meat of this. Tell us, what is Roman Holiday?
All right. Roman Holiday is a 1953 black and white film directed by William Wyler. And please remember his name. We will come back to Willie Wyler quite a bit. And it stars Audrey Hepburn in her first big role. Prior to this, she had had a very small role in European film, and she was a well-known dancer. But this was really her first big role. She actually won an Academy Award for this role. And alongside her, Gregory Peck, who of course is also a big star. And yeah, so it's considered one of the first modern romantic comedies. It's, most people would probably, if you haven't seen it, which to be honest, I'm assuming most people haven't. I
Mhm.
hope you do after you listen to this. But what you would probably recognize from it is the scene of the two of them riding a scooter, a moped together,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the famous scene from the movie.
Yeah, and what a scene. Oh my god.
Oh,
I
it's so fun.
yeah. I Man, this movie was, when I came to you, this is so funny because I always have the story of like when I go to somebody and say, "Hey, do you want to come be on Perfect 10?" and then they go, "Yeah." And like, thankfully at this point now, I because I'm mostly going to sort of the same group of people or whatever, and
Hmm.
it's like there's a little bit of familiarity with it now.
Yeah.
Um but so I didn't have to like explain it to you too much, but it was like, okay, so like just something that you think is a perfect 10. And usually people come back with something and I'm immediately like, yeah, absolutely, 100%, let's do it. And you came back with a few things that were a little bit more let's call them esoteric choices
You could
for
go
for
for it.
what for what sort of conceptually perfect 10 is. But also like you knew the assignment and you nailed it. Like that's the thing about this movie, is that it's not what I would consider modern pop culture, but
No.
this absolutely fits the bill of what a perfect 10 movie is meant to be.
Hmm.
um there is not a frame out of place in this film. Like, oh my
Yes.
god, the artistry and like the
Gorgeous.
exact nature of it, because you had to, because
Yep.
of the fact that you are shooting on real film because it's
Hmm.
1953 with
Yep.
gigantic, difficult to use equipment. Again, because it's 1953, and you are on location in Rome at that time, in a contemporary period, in
Yeah.
modern day,
Which was a
dealing with,
huge fight with the studio at the time. They wanted him
yeah,
to shoot on sets, and he was
yeah,
like, "No, I'm doing this on location." And I think there's some definite reasons why he did that too. But
yeah, for
he was
sure.
insistent that he was going to do it on location, and so
So
yeah.
yeah, so the precision in the way that this film is executed is
Hmm.
just like, it's actually a little bit like, as somebody with a film degree, it is like
Yeah.
staggering to watch. It's one of those things, I was watching it, and like about 15-20 minutes in, I had this moment of like, how was this not
Part of
part
your education.
of my education?
Yep.
Because like, this is the thing, so this, and I gripe about film school all the time. I spent $30,000 and learned how to watch art films, right? Which is not what I wanted to do. It's what everybody else wanted to do. They all wanted to go and make movies about people who did cocaine and held each other at gunpoint, and there was like a weird song playing in the background, right? Because they all thought that they were going to be the next like David Lynch or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
right? Or
Hmm.
like Kevin Smith at best.
Every
Um,
movie is being John Malkovich.
exactly, exactly. And like, I love those types of movies. I love
Sure.
that world, but I wanted to make Star Wars. I wanted to make Indiana
Hmm.
Jones. I wanted to make Jurassic Park, right? Like, those are the movies that I wanted to make when I went into film school. That's the sort of stuff that I was actually, at the time, because it's 2003 when I start film school, I was really obsessed with the Mission Impossible movies. Mission
Yeah, those are
Impossible
great.
2 specifically. It's on
I
a real
love
Tom
that movie.
Cruise
Oh
kick.
my god, wait, no, that's actually my favorite of the Mission
Is
Impossible
it?
movies.
That's
I
hilarious.
love to. It was so
Because
good.
it's the one that gets the most flack, right? But like, it's
I
definitely style
love
over
it.
substance.
I love it.
But
Mhm.
this is the type of movie that, like, if I was gonna talk about something that is foundational to one of the main pillars of cinema today, which is the rom-com, right?
Mhm.
Like when we talk about movies, we're talking about a few things. There are action movies, there
Mhm.
are genre sci-fi fantasy films, right? There are rom-coms, there
Yep.
are dramas, like, and that's kind of like that when we look at like the Academy Awards and that sort of thing. That's kind of how we categorize things. That's how we break
Yeah.
things up, right? And for some reason, we throw musicals in with comedies and romantic comedies. Like, we lump all three of those things together, even though they're three wildly different things.
Yep.
This movie is like the bedrock foundation of what most people would consider a romantic comedy today. It has
Yeah.
all of the hallmarks. It's got
Mhm.
the hidden identity component. It has the secrets and lies, right?
Mhm.
It
Yep.
has the meet cute. It has
Yes.
the sexual tension, like the build
Mhm.
up is just, and like the one thing that it doesn't have in the modern sense is the happy ending, right? Because in
Yes.
today, this movie would have ended with the two of them running off together
Well,
into the
and
sunset.
arguably, there's a version where it did. So the
Okay.
movie which is best known to have been inspired by this one is Notting Hill.
Okay.
And when you think about it, it's the same story, right? She's an
Hmm.
actress, which is like the modern day princess.
Yeah.
So she's the Audrey Hepburn character, Julia Roberts. And then, Hugh Grant would be Gregory Peck, who's just sort of the everyman, and everything. And it becomes this thing about like, well, do they just come from two totally different worlds and they can't be together? And to your point, Roman Holiday ends kind of bittersweet. They can't be together. They're separated. But Notting Hill, they sort of have this big moment where like he realizes he was wrong and he runs after her and then catches up and then tells her, and you're led to believe that she basically quits being an actress, and then they are, happily ever after. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, so to your point, the modern would have a happily ever after, and this
Yeah.
doesn't. And I think it's really interesting to talk about why that is, like why this movie, why did William Wyler choose that for this ending? I think it's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just note, so this is the first Audrey Hepburn film that I've ever watched from
Really?
start to finish. Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, like, obviously there's issues because like this one I think holds up really well in terms of like, yeah, it's got dated stuff, but overall it's there's nothing in it that's like horrifically offensive, as opposed to like when you watch Breakfast at Tiffany's and it has
famously,
horribly racist
infamously
content. Right, exactly.
Infamously.
So things like that, where it's like, I think this definitely is one of the better ones to watch, but it is excellent. And you can totally see why she became a star and that she won the Academy Award for this role. Although I have some opinions about that too, where looking at this and then looking across kind of romantic comedies in general, and romances in general, the women in their roles, they tend to get nominations and praise, and the men tend to get ignored even when they give similarly excellent performances. I think a great example is Silver Linings Playbook. Great for Jennifer Lawrence and all, but I still don't understand why Bradley Cooper got no attention for that role, because he was fantastic. So, but I see that happen a lot. And so this is another example where like Gregory Peck gets no attention, even though he gave a fantastic performance in this film. But she's the star for sure.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest standout to me of this film is the cast, and like top to bottom, like everybody that is in this is so well cast, so perfect. But I will say, like you talk about like it being a little bit problematic. The only piece that gave me a little bit of cringe is towards the end, and all of the journalists are introducing themselves. And the journalist from Tel Aviv is a very cartoonishly Jewish looking man, and probably actually Jewish, but still it was very like, let's make a point out of this, which was a very common thing back then. So it's one of those things where I was like,
I do wonder
there's
about
the
that,
Jewish
though.
guy.
But I do wonder about that because William Wyler was Jewish. And his entire family was killed in the Holocaust.
Okay.
So like and that's another thing I want to talk about in terms of the context of this movie and okay, like I don't want to get into this right away unless you want to, but so a really good pairing to watch with this film is a Steven Spielberg produced documentary on Netflix called Five Came Back. It's a 3-part series. It's really excellent. I highly recommend it. And what it's about is there were 5 famous Hollywood directors during World War II who partnered with the U.S. military to document the war. And it was Frank Capra, William Wyler, John Huston, John Ford, and George Stevens. And so this is all about their experiences in the war, for the most part, actually embedded with the troops and, filming the war frequently in color. And they all made films and things. The most sort of dramatic of those, I would argue, was George Stevens, who was actually present at the liberation of Dachau, and the footage that he took was actually used at the Nuremberg trials and all this stuff. So what's interesting is, that's a fascinating story about their experience in the war, and William Wyler himself being the only one of that group who was Jewish and therefore had that perspective on the war, and then sort of what happened to their careers after, how it affected them, what they did, what they made. Because, I think this story is fascinating to consider, given that it's less than a decade after the end of the war that he made this.
Yeah.
So that all would have been extremely fresh in his mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. Okay. I mean, like that's the thing is when we talk about movies in this time period, context is everything, right? So, and when we talk about stuff around like, you know, cultural sensitivities and stuff like that and how they were very different at the time,
Hmm.
that context is so huge, because for me watching it without that context, I see this guy and I'm like, we're going down the line and it's like this guy from America, this guy from France, this guy
Hmm.
from Italy, this guy, and they're like, I also noted that like the journalist from Amsterdam was the only woman in the
Yeah,
lineup,
yeah, I know.
and I was like, that makes sense actually, like
Yeah.
Amsterdam being very progressive,
Hmm.
and all that. And so it was just this thing of like, huh, that was a choice,
Yeah,
but
but
maybe
I wonder if it had not been a Jewish director, would he have included a journalist
a
from Tel Aviv
Jewish,
at all?
yeah,
Yeah.
and exactly, that's exactly like the context. It flips it. It
Hmm.
actually like turns it on its ear, and you're like, actually, okay, no, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
But no, that's fascinating, because that put the story of him having been in Europe for World War II, documenting it, and then being so adamant that, and I mean, the movie starts with this whole film was shot in Rome.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
it,
he was in Rome in the liberation of Rome.
yeah,
He was there. He filmed it. So it says that in the documentary. It says on
yeah,
June 5th, 1944, Weiler filmed the liberation of Rome by Allied forces. So he was there. So he had a huge connection to this city. And
yeah,
the fact that he wanted to show it and make sure that audiences saw it, because keep in mind, people didn't travel anywhere near as frequently as they do today. So
yeah,
most people who would be seeing this in an American audience, or even in many cases, British audiences, because it was a big hit in Britain too, which we'll get to in a second. But they they would probably never go to Rome in their lives, or had
yeah,
even really ever seen it other than maybe a few photos. And here he has them literally going through the streets, showing
yeah,
them everything, and all over major landmarks all throughout. And so he clearly wanted to show this city off, and he wanted
yeah,
people to see it and think of it not just as it was during the war and under 20 years of fascism. He wanted
yeah.
them to see it as it was now, kind of having this rebirth. And so it's a beautiful movie in that sense.
It's it. I think like the talking about him as a Jewish man, I think also it gives me interesting context of something that I thought was like noteworthy and missing, not missing from the film, because I don't think that it needed it at all. But we're in Rome and we spend no time talking about the Vatican.
Yep. Yep.
There is like the Monsignor comes at the one point, and that is it. Like that is the closest thing
Yep.
to anything referencing the Vatican, which I think a Catholic filmmaker at the
Would have
time
included. Yeah.
would have made a big deal about. We're in Rome, we have to see some of
Yep.
Vatican City, right?
Hmm.
But this film focuses, obviously he fell in love with the city because it focuses so much on like that street level,
Yes.
like on the ground experience of being there, to the extent of like the kids playing in the fountain is
Yes.
just such a, like it's such an whatever. I don't, what does he have, that fruit that he has that he buys when
Oh
he's
yeah,
being
can't tell.
undercover or
It's some
whatever.
kind of melon, I think.
It's
Which,
like,
by the
yeah,
way, made me think of Aladdin. That whole scene where like
yeah,
she's going through the marketplace
me
and he's
too.
watching her, and then he ends up grabbing the melon to like cover for himself. I was like, it's like the Aladdin and Jasmine meet cute. Oh my god.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like those little moments like that, seeing the Colosseum from the perspective of somebody visiting, right?
Yeah,
Like,
like as
cause,
a tourist.
and like you
Yeah.
said, this would have been a lot of people's first exposure to a lot of these aspects of Rome. Previous to that, they may have only ever seen, if they even saw a picture of the Colosseum, an
Hmm.
actual photograph of the Colosseum in a textbook, or a, a very boring, objective shot of it in a newsreel at some
Hmm.
point, right?
Yep.
But here we are, we're at the eye level that you would be at if you were actually walking through the Colosseum, and they've got the little guide that they've hired to
Yeah.
show her around and stuff like that. And it was
Yep.
just like there it is. And it's, and the other part of it, like it, the movie made me want to go to Rome
Yes, me too.
in 1953.
I know, because
right?
especially it was before it was a very car heavy city. There were not, if
Yeah,
you look, there's very few cars, and so it's mostly walking city. You do get the people on the little scooters and bikes, and they even have horse-drawn carriages in some
yeah,
instances. So like it's a walking city, and so yeah, to your point, it's like it makes you want to visit, but it makes you want to visit like I don't know,
yeah.
however many years ago this is now,
Yeah,
70
and that's
something.
it.
Mhm.
The best movies from periods like this, from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they always do that. They always make you like idealize that time period.
Mhm.
Obviously, I do not want to travel back to 1953 because
Pass.
there's a lot of human rights things
Oh yeah.
that I would have a lot of problem with, and I'd have a hard time swallowing in
Mhm.
daily life.
Sure.
But I mean, like Back to the Future only ever even glosses over that very quickly of the
Mhm.
of Goldie Wilson, who will become mayor in 1985, but in
Oh yeah.
1955 is like, yeah, a colored president, a colored mayor.
Oof.
That's a
Yep.
that I'll will live to
Mhm.
see that day, sort of thing, right? Like,
Yep.
um, but yeah, like that's the time period that we're in. That's my like the 50s. My frame of reference for the 50s is always going to be Back to the Future,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first film.
Which is
I guess
valid.
Back to the Future too as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
like that's a and that's a very, again, like even that one's a very like sanitized version of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, but I do look at it and go like I would love to visit these locations, but if you were to go now, they would just be overrun with people, and like the Colosseum's got all of these like additions to it, let's call them.
Mhm.
And they're there for safety, and they're there to stop
Yeah.
people from messing with what is a a wonder of the world, right? But
Mhm.
a man-made wonder of the world, but like the experience would not be the same
Yeah.
as what
Definitely.
we got to see in this film. So it's like literally the closest that we could get to traveling back to the 1950s and walking through the
Exactly.
Colosseum in Rome and seeing
Exactly.
it very much untouched, like very much just as it is.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, like stuff like that is just so much fun. The other thing about this movie that I just think is so remarkable is that it it is a lot of the times you watch stuff from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it feels very dated.
Yep.
This movie feels modern
It does.
even though it is from 1953, like it.
Yes.
And that's because it does literally have everything. And I think about the old trailers from back then where it would be like this movie's got it all. It has love, it has intrigue, it has romance, it has
Yep.
action, but it literally does.
It
Like
does.
when we get to the dance on the boat at the end, and
Yes.
then
The
the
fight
bad guys
scene.
show
Oh
up,
my god, it's so
and
good.
we get an awesome fight scene.
It's so
I
fun.
That is so well choreographed,
Yes.
and then also so comedic when
Yes.
she hits him with the guitar,
Photographer misses it.
and Irving's like, oh man, he's like, hit her again, and she does it, and he gets the shot, and it's like this moment of elation because you're in the fight
Yes.
with them. And when the barber like joins in, because like she's just like every great female protagonist, she just has charmed everybody that she's met along
Yes.
the way, and they're all willing to go to jail.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Right, all three
It's
of
so
them.
fun, and like and then the whole sequence where like they get arrested for reckless driving, and
Yeah,
so then he like pretends like she's his bride and it's
yeah,
like it is so funny. Like I just
yeah.
it really holds up, and that's what I find fascinating about it is that like it does feel modern, and that's why for me personally, I like this movie because I can watch it anytime. It is one of my sort of like go-tos because I'm just like it's fun, it's modern, it's a romantic comedy. I would pop it in
Yeah,
with the same frequency that I would any other romantic comedy because
yeah,
it's a good time.
yeah. I mean, so pull back the curtain a little bit. I watched it literally this morning before we recorded, and like I got up at 7:30. I got up at 7, got ready 7:30, watched this movie. So it was a very weird uh, window to watch a romantic comedy from 1953 at 7:30 in the morning on a Sunday. But that's I had to watch it before we talked about it. We
Well,
were
it's
gonna
very
watch
fresh
it
in your
last
mind.
night. Yeah, we were gonna watch it last night, Crystal and I, but I one thing led to another last night, and we ended up not even getting home until 10 o'clock at night.
Oof,
And
no.
so it was just kind of like, it just didn't work out. So
Yeah,
I was like, I gotta watch it this morning. But then Crystal slept in. I let her sleep in.
fair enough.
She didn't have homework that she'd left till the last minute like I did. So nothing changes. I'm exactly like I was in high school. I
I mean, if it was me, I'd be doing the same thing. So I get it.
she wakes up and comes out of the bedroom after I finished the movie, and she's like, "So how was it?" And I was like, "You missed a great movie. Like you
Nice.
missed an absolutely great movie. Like we'll
Well, hopefully
watch it
she gets
again."
to watch it soon. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I was like, because I rented it, and I kind of
Hmm.
regret that I rented it, that I spent five
You want to buy
dollars
it now?
because it's like, well, this is a movie that I would go back and watch. It's a movie that I think, when my girls get older, would be worthwhile.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I'll pay the $5 again at some point to watch
Someday.
it again.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, or if I ever see it like a Blu-ray or something like that. Not that that ever happens these days, but
Well, they have a Blu-ray of it, but it's not on the Criterion Collection yet, which annoys the crap out of me. Apparently, Paramount is a pain about these things, so I don't know.
mhm,
Hopefully someday. But I mean, there's
yeah,
definitely versions out there that you can buy that are good. So yeah.
get some good special features or whatnot.
Yeah, actually, I love the behind the scenes features. Some of them are really excellent, and you learn all kinds of good stuff. Although, again, I want to repeat: you want to watch Five Came Back on Netflix
Yeah,
because that's that. I mean, they don't talk about the movie very much. There's like two shots from it, but you understand the filmmakers, and that means a lot.
yeah, for sure. I mean, like, yeah, especially because of the fact that we are so out of time with the context of a movie like this being made. Because nowadays, to say that a movie is shot in Rome, it's like, yeah, sure, whatever,
Yeah, who
right?
cares,
Like,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, they shot the Lizzie
the Da
McGuire
Vinci
movie in
Code.
Rome. Who gives a darn?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Exactly. It's not that big of a deal. But at the time, for an American production to take everything over there,
Yeah.
not because they're going to go film in Italy because it's cheap to film in the middle of nowhere, Italy, to make a Western, but because, like, hey, we're going to film in the middle of, like, the heart of this city and capture it.
Hmm.
Such
Yep.
a big deal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I want to talk about Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck a little bit as well,
Yes,
because
please.
I think most people are going to have familiarity with Gregory Peck because of To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Like
Yep.
that's sort of his marquee, number one iconic role.
Hmm.
Um, this character couldn't be further from that
Oh
character,
yeah.
which I think
Oh,
is so
totally different.
funny.
Hmm.
But what a like just perfect template for your leading man.
Oh, he's
Um,
so good. Although he's so funny because when they interviewed him about this, he said, "Well, they offered it to Cary Grant first, and he turned it down." And he said, "And I noticed around this time in my career, he said I was getting all of the scripts that Cary Grant turned down."
yeah,
So,
that's too funny.
he's aware that he was kind of
Um,
like the second choice, but he did wonderful.
he kind of, like, in terms of his visual, he reminds me a bit of Jude Law. Like, they kind of have the same stature. They
Yeah,
have that same
yeah.
jawline.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very
Yeah.
similar look. But in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, like, his performance in this, he actually almost it's almost a Harrison Ford. It's not quite
Yes.
as gruff as Harrison Ford. He's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit softer on the edges, but sort of the that instant charisma, like the fact that you just, like, it doesn't matter what this guy's gonna do, because actually we're sort of introduced to him. He's a bit of a scoundrel, right?
He
Like, he's
is.
like, and which is perfect for your
Yeah.
romantic comedy lead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with the wrong actor, you end up with somebody that we're not gonna relate to. And when he starts deceiving her for
Yeah.
his own gain, we're gonna turn against him, right?
Right.
But but because Gregory Peck can also turn around and play Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, he has that
Mhm.
in his range as well. That charm, that I there's a there is a morality even in him doing something that is wrong, even in him
Mhm.
deceiving her and using her for his own gain. There's still You still get the sense that this is a good man. Like, he is a
Yes.
good guy. He's just a good guy with a great opportunity in front of him, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't doubt his journalistic integrity for a second.
Right, right.
So it's like he's got it. So you're right there with him. You are in his position and going like, no, this is a once in a lifetime story. He's got to do this, and
100%.
I support his decisions
Well, and I
because it's
also love the
ultimately going
way
to lead her on the adventure that she wants to be on, right?
exactly. So it ends up being what she needs, even
Yeah,
though he has the wrong motivations for it originally. But I also love that they do get you to empathize with him, even though he's being unscrupulous at the beginning, because of the fact that they make it very clear that he is broke. And
yeah,
I love the way that they tell you from the beginning how much money he has, so that every time somebody asks him for more money, you know how much less he has, and you know how close he's getting to having
yeah.
none at all. And so I love that you could actually track the closer he gets to being completely broke until the
Yeah.
end, where he's literally in debt.
So I did a Google after I finished the movie of how much $50, because that's what he asks Irving for.
Yep.
He's like, hey, front me $50. And Irving's like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
you're paying that back on top of my cut.
Yep.
And I was like $50. And I was like, well, hold up a second. Let's
How
do
much
this
was
math.
that?
And
Yeah.
so I Googled it. $50 is $555 in today's money.
Yep.
That's how much money he asked him for, so that he could take her out on the town and whatever.
Yep.
So let's take that and extrapolate $5,000.
Yep.
No wonder he was willing to cut Irving in for 25%. Because I was like, you're gonna give this guy and Irving, so that's $1,500. It's $1,250. Slow down.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
So good.
That's great. Oh,
Such a good moment.
so
That's
fun.
those moments, the moments between Gregory Peck and Eddie Albert.
Yes.
Those are the moments that where I get the Harrison Ford part
Uh-huh.
of Gregory Peck, where
Absolutely.
he's like, listen, like there's a very Han Solo thing of like,
Yes.
listen, Jabba, like
I
that
know,
sort
I
of a thing.
totally agree. And you get that all through because, again, it's like he's there with the princess and he's only in it for the money, sister type like that. It's all there. It's
Yeah,
absolutely. I also think there's a lot of like the Dimitri and Anya from Anastasia thing going on, because he's a con man using the
yeah,
princess to get the money. Like, it's literally the same thing.
yeah,
So I mean, it's a very well known trope, but it works so well here. And to your point, it's because
yeah.
they're so charming that they pull it off. But yeah, I do. I love his banter with Irving. It's a riot. It's so fun. And he himself is hilarious. Irving's a great character.
Oh my god! Like what and it's funny because Eddie Albert is a person who would go on to then like have a really big career
Yeah.
later in his life, and
Mm-hmm.
at the time, like Eddie Albert is a known quantity. His name's on the poster,
Yep.
but it's funny because like there's this period of his career where he's like a young sort of like best friend supporting actor type of guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he goes into like in the 60s and 70s, it's just a string of like one-off appearances in whatever random TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then later on in his career, he like as an older man, he found a little bit more success in like in that sort of a role, from playing
Yeah.
in that archetype. But he is so good in this film.
He is.
Every single scene that he is in, he absolutely just steals. And that beard, I love his, like, just his whole look.
Yeah.
You know these guys instantly, right?
Yes.
From the moment
Yes.
that we see them in the card game, you know these two guys,
Yep.
and there's like this rapport between them, and we don't really have as much information as we're gonna have later, like of just how connected these two are.
Mm-hmm.
But even like right from the get-go, you're like, where, like, because he takes all the money, he wins all the
Yeah.
money, and you're like, well, he's not mad at him. Like, he's like,
Yeah.
I'm out, guys. Like, I got enough money for coffee tomorrow. I gotta leave. Like,
Exactly.
I'm not gonna make it to payday. And like in a different context, he definitely would have turned and like given a stink eye to Irving if
Yeah.
that wasn't a character that was going to come back and that is actually like his friend. And
Yeah.
then when we see Irving again and he's taking the pictures,
Of this model. That's right. And he's got women all over Rome.
and it's quite salacious because
It
in
is.
1953 we can see her underwear.
I
Like,
know. I know.
I was
He's
like,
literally on the ground. She's on a balcony, and he's
yeah.
shooting upward at her. So what is he getting in his shots?
So
You
he
know?
is definitely living in Europe,
Yeah.
taking pictures for like Ooh La La magazine, right?
Exactly.
That's who's paying his bills, and he's probably
Mhm.
making a lot of money because he's pretty good at it. But
Yep.
I like you just get that, and like just his wardrobe, the beard,
Which was so
he's
unusual at the time. Everyone was clean shaven, and he
yeah,
himself, actually, to your point, in his other roles, he was known for having a crew cut. But apparently, when he got this role, and he was like, "All right, I'm growing out my hair, I'm growing out my beard." He was
yeah,
excited to do this because it was a departure from what he did and from what was common on film at the time.
yeah. It's funny because he's very like bohemian beatnik,
Yes, very
the
much.
striped T-shirt, right? Like it was
Yep.
like I just his look, I was like that like this is iconic. Um, Yeah, he's so good. He's so good. That was kind of my biggest thing, and that is usually like, um, in Romeo and Juliet, my favorite character is Mercutio, right? Like I
Yes,
like
yes,
that's just me to a
exactly.
T. Like I
Oh my
often
god.
like the the sidekick buddy that supports is usually my favorite character.
Okay,
Um,
to go back to the Notting Hill comparison, his
yeah,
flatmate, the one who's like, "You daft prick," like that guy. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, like those are the best characters in these kinds of movies. Like, I mean, you love the main couple. Obviously, everything rides on
yeah.
them. Their chemistry has to work. But then having these supporting characters who are so colorful and so fun, like it just makes the whole experience better and the whole journey a lot more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let's we've talked about the guys. Let's talk
Yeah.
about Audrey Hepburn.
Oh my
This is like everybody knows who Audrey Hepburn is, obviously. It's she's one of the most iconic actresses in the history of Hollywood. All of that stuff. Like I said, I've never seen a movie with her before,
I'm so
not
glad
from
this
start
was
to
your
finish.
first.
I've seen most of Breakfast at Tiffany's because it's impossible to avoid. There's just clips everywhere and
Yeah.
people, whatever, right? Like that's her most iconic role. I'm in love. Like she's incredible,
She's so charming. You
and
understand
I'm like,
immediately how she
yeah.
became a star. Like you just get it, you know?
Um, at the end and I DM'd you when I got to this part in the movie of like she just had her own little hero's journey, didn't she? Because she comes back like obviously at the beginning of the movie she's very, like she's this princess and everybody's like telling her what to do and her life is scheduled and it sucks. She
Mhm.
hates it and that's
Yep.
why this whole thing starts. She runs away, right? Such a classic. I mean, it's almost it isn't almost it is a you're the expert. It's a fairy tale trope, right?
Oh, I mean, you
She's
don't
like
understand why I picked this movie. I picked this movie because it is, if you ever want to understand what a Swan Maiden story is, watch this movie. It is the quintessential Swan Maiden. It has every single motif specifically. And so
yeah,
and obviously it has very specific elements. It has the, Cinderella, especially the whole, to your point about how charming she is. What's the initial scene that we get with her? It's the ball scene where she accidentally loses a shoe, and that whole
yeah.
scene is so funny and so charming. But the fact that it's a shoe is how you know they're referencing Cinderella. So
Yeah.
yes, this is a fairy tale. Very, very clearly, that's what they're doing here. It's deliberate.
But unlike Cinderella, as we're classically told it over and over again, like we will go back to the Disney version, at the end of this film, she goes back to the palace and everybody's all worried about her and they're all like, how could you do this? And she just stands there in front of them and does what she could not do at the beginning of the movie, which is just like, no, I'm the princess here, you
Yep.
guys.
Yep.
I'm the one with authority. I'm
Hmm.
royalty. You guys are servants. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter how high your station is, I'm higher. So
Hmm.
like right up to the end when like as she dismisses everybody and I love the way that she does it where she's like I give you permission to withdraw.
Yes.
So good.
So good.
So much sass and so much like Obi-Wan Kenobi would be proud.
Yes.
I
Yes,
so
absolutely.
much sass. I and then her countess is kind of like, yeah, everybody leave, and then goes to close the doors and she's like, oh, you can leave too.
Yes.
And there's
Yes.
this look on her face of
Yep.
like, oh, I just lost the war. Like it's done, I'm done.
Exactly. To the point of
um
where then when they all reappear at
yeah,
the press conference in the following scene, then she doesn't even say anything to them. She literally just literally moves her eyes and they know to back off. And I just
Yeah.
love that. Like, she is completely in command of her world after she
Yeah.
returns from this adventure. So yes, it's a
Yeah.
hero's journey, it's a heroine's journey, it's a wild woman journey, it's all those things at once. But yes, she goes on this journey and returns. And so while it is, for the romance, it's not a happily ever after. For her character and for his character too, they clearly took something away from it that they will now take with them and give them a richer, more whole life after this.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because Gregory Peck's character Joe Bradley also he finds his heart of gold
Yep.
underneath the scoundrel, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he makes the right call at the end,
Mm-hmm.
despite a literal fortune like that, and that's
Yep.
why I looked up the money, because it's like, because that again, that context for the audience is going to be lost on us, because we're going to go $5,000. That sounds like a good week's work.
Yeah.
But to him, $5,000 is like, oh, because his whole thing, like, it's not, we don't get into detail on it. And it's something that I love about it, is that we don't spend much time in exposition in this film,
Yeah.
even though it takes an hour for the movie to actually get started, which I thought was really funny, but that's the pacing of old movies.
Yep.
The context here is that, like, he doesn't want to be in Rome anymore. He wants to go home, right? Like, but he's broke and he cannot afford to leave. And
Mm-hmm.
$5,000, even minus $1,250, like 3/4 of that would be enough for him to get back to New York and get set up and get back to the life that he obviously wants to be living.
Yep.
Because there's even the moment where she's like, this apartment is great, and it's like, oh, look at all these people, this view is so wonderful, and he's like, yeah, it has its moments.
Yes.
He's clearly, like, he's fallen out of love with Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And she helps him find that again, of like,
because
oh,
seeing
wait.
it through her eyes just makes him go, oh, right, this is a really incredible place. Like, for instance, I really, really love the scene where they're looking at the wall of all the tablets of wishes. I think it's just called the Wall of Wishes or something like that, a Wall of Dreams. Anyway, but the point is, he tells this story, which, by the way, given what we know about William Wyler, I'm assuming that this is actually a story that he heard firsthand in Rome. Because it references the war. It's the only time in the movie that they reference the war, where they say, "Oh, this started during the war. There was an air raid, and these people huddled by the wall, and they were safe, even though the bombs went off near them. And so then somebody nailed a tablet of their dreams or their wishes to the wall, and every time it came true, someone else would come back and nail another tablet, and so they have all these wishes that came true all along the wall. And so that kind of moment is just, I don't know, I just think it's just gorgeous. And these moments, to your point, it's a slower paced movie, but all of this adds up into this really wonderful story where you can see the journey the characters are going on. And Gregory Peck, like his character Joe Bradley, he does sort of get this new lease on life, even though he's still broke at the end.
Yeah, you kind of have this realization towards the end of, like, it's okay because Irving's there too. So
Irving's gonna take care of it.
He's never gonna be destitute, because if he needs money, Irving's gonna give him his rent. Like, it's like, it'll be fine. He'll be fine.
Yep.
It's such a complete movie. I'm still, even a couple hours later, astounded at how perfectly complete and packaged from start to finish this film is. Because a lot of the times we go back to older movies and you go, like, okay, they were still new movies. The motion picture was still, we were still figuring it out. And on the reverse end of that, today, sometimes you go to a movie and you're like, this movie is just, it's got it too figured out. You know what I mean? Like, it's too by the book. It's too tight. This could have stood to be a little bit messier. This movie is right right perfectly down the middle
Yeah,
of
it
both of
hits the
those
right
things.
balance. Like
Yeah.
it is slower when it needs to be, but there's also no wasted time. Like there's no scene in
Yeah.
this movie where I'm like, well, you could cut that. No, you can't
Yeah.
cut any of the scenes in this movie. They all are there for a reason. They're very important. And so that is the really cool thing about it. And it definitely works. But to your point about how precise it is, I mean, that's what William Wyler was known for. His nickname in Hollywood was 40 Take Willie because he shot so many takes, and then you go back and see the interviews with all of the actors that worked for him, and they're all like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure we did like 27 takes on that or
Yeah.
whatever, and then of course the 40 takes which he was known for. And but the interesting thing about that was that so many of his lead actors receive Academy Awards
Hmm.
for their roles with him. Like he was known as like the actor's director, and like a lot of actors would tell other like, oh, if you really want to level up your acting, you got to go work with Willie. And so they would all do that. And so Audrey Hepburn as well. She says, I mean, yes, he gave me my chance, but also she's like it was like you know getting the best possible direction right out of the gate. He helped her really just improve her performance, and so that's how she became this big star. So yeah, it was just he was so precise. Another thing I want to mention about him that's really interesting is during the war he was flying in B-17 and B-25. I gotta get it right. I don't. Yeah, B-25 bombers, and he actually lost his hearing. He became deaf because they're so loud.
Hmm.
And by the time by the time he directed this film, he had regained maybe 20% of his hearing, but it really wasn't enough to hear his actors on set. And so he actually had a sound tech that helped him rig an audio amplifier so that he could hear better. But for the most part, you have to assume he wasn't really hearing what was going on that much,
Yeah.
which is actually why you can tell watching this movie how much of the action is actually done in pantomime. There are a lot of scenes that have no dialogue or very little dialogue. And I think that's very evident. So, but what you get because of that is a bigger emphasis on the visuals. And so everything is so visually precise, and it's a very easy story to follow without dialogue because of he's such a good visual storyteller.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a great video of somebody took Indiana Jones and they desaturated it to black and white. They didn't tweak it at all. They just desaturated it straight to black and white, and removed all of the dialogue. And the only thing that's intact is the black and white picture and John Williams' score.
Mm-hmm.
And you can watch that whole movie without any dialogue and no sound effects, nothing, just the
Mm-hmm.
music and the most basic version of the image,
Mm-hmm.
and you can understand Raiders of the Lost Ark from start to
Exactly.
finish.
Exactly.
You don't miss a beat. And this movie, same. And there is the sequence in the middle, like at the after the car chase, after the
Yep.
Vespa chase, um where they're in the police station and there is no dialogue and it's
Yes.
just the music plays over it, and you get the wedding march plays, and that's
Yes.
where we
It
get
works so well.
and then that scene ends and they come out, and I love it when all of the citizens that are all pissed off because he knocked over the cart and drove through the
Yeah.
painting and all of this, like they all come out, and the one the big the very stereotypical big Italian guy in an undershirt and suspenders
Yep.
comes over and gives her a big kiss and
Yep.
then kisses him, and because they're
Congratulate.
like, congratulations
Yeah.
on your wedding. And it's just it a lesser director couldn't have pulled that off,
Exactly.
like it definitely speaks to the skill
Yeah, and it's so funny that
of
you
the
mentioned
directing.
Spielberg because he's the one. So what they did for this documentary, the Five Came Back documentary, is for each of these five directors that they're profiling, they actually paired them with more famous modern directors. So they had Guillermo del Toro, obviously Spielberg, Coppola, Paul Greengrass, and our favorite Lawrence Kasdan.
Nice.
And so
Oh
they
man,
paired them with
you just sold me on this documentary
you
even
have to
more.
see it. It's so good. But Spielberg is specifically paired with Wyler. And so the whole way through this documentary, he's just talking about all the things he admires about Wyler and like breaking
Mm,
down like his movies and the shots he does. So it's funny that you would make that comparison even like subconsciously because very obviously
yeah,
he was inspired by Wyler's films like this one. And
yeah.
so it's just very cool. And so kind of getting back to that whole point of like, well, why this movie? Because it is foundational, whether people realize it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like that to me, if I were to ever if I were to go into teaching, it would probably be design. But
Mhm.
if I were to teach film at some point and I needed to put movies on a curriculum, this absolutely goes on my curriculum.
Heck yeah.
Like alongside things like Casablanca and Star
Mhm.
Wars.
Yep.
Like like we do not have film today as it is. You don't have like every Julia Roberts, why am I blanking? I'm blanking on every other rom-com actress. Sandra Bullock,
Sandra
like
Bullock, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, like everybody who's made their career off of the romantic comedy, they owe a huge debt of gratitude to this movie because
Absolutely.
like I don't think that we would have the template as clear as it is. I mean, that's always one of those things of like, well, somebody else would have done it eventually, but they
Yeah.
didn't. This is the movie
Mhm.
in the timeline that we exist in. This is the movie that sets the standard for this is what a romantic comedy is going to be.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it is absolutely foundational. This is an important film, which I didn't going into this. I was like, it's an older movie. It'll probably have some stuff that'll be important. And then that's my film school background coming in of like, okay, like let's sit down, let's watch this with a critical
Sure.
lens. And then I'm like 15 minutes into it and I'm like, this is insane. This is insane. I don't
Right?
need a critical lens. This is just a great movie. This is
Exactly.
why it's like to steal a line from Ebert, this is why we go to the movies. Like a movie
Yeah.
like this is why we go to the theater and we sit down with a popcorn and a soda and somebody that we love and we watch a great film.
And that
Like
goes back
that
to
like
what you said at the beginning about like why you went to film school. Like you didn't
yeah.
go because you wanted to be like, oh, let's see this,
Yeah.
auteur film or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that wasn't why you were interested in the things that had the broad appeal. And this does, and you see why.
Yeah.
It's important to talk about why things have broad appeal because it helps us understand ourselves, our culture, like mass entertainment has value. And so
Mhm.
it's really great to see something like this, to enjoy it, and then, if you are so inclined, to understand why it has that level of
Yeah.
appeal.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And this is a great example of a movie that hits the sweet spot of it is mass appeal. It is on the surface just a great fun movie to watch, but then it does not even take a lot of excavation. It's like right,
Mm-hmm.
you blow the dust off of it and you can see the thematic stuff going on.
Yep.
It does a wonderful thing that I love it when movies do this, and it states its thesis when she talks about being Cinderella. I got to get back by
Mm-hmm.
midnight or I'll turn into a pumpkin.
Yep.
Like when the movie can turn to the audience and say, guys, this is what this was about the whole time.
Yep.
And we get that moment essentially right before the our her big moment at the end of like confronting everybody and
Mm-hmm.
taking her power,
Yep.
right? um it's like it's a 1-2 punch of like this is why, like, she makes a joke now about being Cinderella because
Mm-hmm.
she's not anymore. She
Yep.
was when we started with when she lost her glass slipper
Yep.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
She was Cinderella, but now she's evolved and she's grown beyond that and she's something
Mm-hmm.
else, right?
Yes.
So when the movie can just like tell you without taking you out of it, I think
Mm-hmm.
like that's one of those things. I mean, uh, we I can't believe we've made it almost an hour in and we haven't gushed about Willow,
Oh, I know, I
because
know. Well, okay, but
but like that's what
yeah.
Willow has done so well, is that it's like every once in a while it stops and turns to the camera and goes, hey, this is what this story is about, you guys, and then gets right back into the story
Yep.
without missing a beat, right? And that
Exactly.
I love it. Some people want the mystery box, they want the M. Night Shyamalan, what a twist. They want
Mm-hmm.
to be tricked by the filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, as I get older, I want that less and less. I
Yeah.
want to be a part of the conversation with the
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker and with the story. And if there is going to be a twist, I better know that twist 5 seconds before it happens.
Yeah.
Because if I'm surprised by it, then you didn't tell your story properly.
I agree.
Right?
I
You
totally
withheld
agree.
information in order to mess with me.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Which can also work if you're subversive like Ryan Johnson in Glass Onion, but that's a different thing.
Yeah.
That's a great example of like, you got to know the rules to break the rules with that one. But yeah.
Well, it's fully appreciating what genre you're working in, I think. And that's
Totally.
what I like about this, is to your point, is that like, why does that sort of straightforward, like almost fourth wall breaking approach work for this film? Because it's a fairy tale. And what's interesting about that is that you get that not just in, you know, the fact that there's a princess and they reference Cinderella and we have the shoe and the whole thing. It's not just that. It's also even the way that this is told. There are a lot of scenes, even though this is shot on location, there are a lot of scenes in this movie that are played as though they are on stage. They are absolutely staged, almost even like a sitcom, where you feel like there's an audience where the camera is. And so, like, especially for instance, think of all the scenes in his apartment. Do you ever see the wall from which the camera is pointing? No.
Yeah.
It's like a set, you know? And so it's done that way throughout. And you're very conscious of the fact that there is a storyteller. You know, like you're just very aware of the presence of the person who could have arguably started the story saying, once upon a time. And so that is why those kinds of very direct lines work really well. Another place that you see that in this movie that I really, really love is so when the doctor appears. So at the beginning, she's so stressed out by this European tour that she's going on, and how they're ordering her to go around here and there, and they have everything scheduled down to the T. They control what she eats, they control what she wears, they control everything she does. And she kind of gets just so upset, and obviously, they call it hysterics, but whatever, it's 1953, what are you going to do? And so they call the doctor to come basically sedate her. But what's interesting about that is, even though we can say like, oh, this is so misogynistic, no. What's really happening here, if you look at the structure of the fairy tale, is this is a fairy godmother showing up to put her under a spell. Because he says to her, well, the best medicine I know is to just do exactly what you want for a while. And then that is what she says to Joe later when he's like, well, what do you want to do? She says, I just want to do exactly what I want for a whole day. And that's what it is. That's the spell that she's under, the spell that she needs in order to discover her power. And so it tells you, the movie tells you that that's what it's about, is this princess being placed under the spell. Like, again, Cinderella, it's the fairy godmother showing up to like, I'm going to send you off to the ball, except for instead of going to the ball, she's going away from the palace to the real world.
Yeah. And they kind of distract you from some of the more it's a really masterful way of doing it, because you're in this moment, you're like, wait, they're just gonna drug her to get her to go to sleep, which even in the context of the 1950s was still like, the women in the audience would have been a little bit like, yeah, we don't really like that. No. But they soften it by having the general, who is, supposed to be he's our male archetype at this point in the movie. He faints at the sight of a needle.
Yes.
So it's this subversive moment of like, yes, we're doing a misogynistic thing and we're actually aware of it. Like, even though it's the 1950s and this is common practice, and you're in hysterics and we're going to talk down to you like you're a child, which is also, it's a part of the story. So obviously, William
the story says that this is not okay, and she needs to break free of it and not allow them to treat her this way anymore.
Yeah, so, but to keep us in a light mood, they take the manliest guy in the room and they make him faint at the sight of a needle. And they even have him like confront the moments of like afterwards, they like, oh my goodness, and they get home. He's like, I'm fine. It's not a big deal. Nothing happened. You guys didn't see anything. And he goes into like a macho thing, and like we don't focus on it. It's not like oh, this is important to the story. It's literally just there for levity. And to start us on the path of like, she actually has more agency than she realizes. These people are cartoons. Right. I messaged you right at the beginning of watching the movie, that first scene when she's like meeting everybody, all the dignitaries or whatever. And it goes from that and then into the dancing. And then she's dancing with she's dancing with this little, very like regal looking guy with all this stuff. And I was like, that's the Duke of Wesselton. That's 100% the Duke of Wesselton from Frozen. And I messaged you. I'm like, did Frozen steal the coronation stuff, like all of the coronation ball stuff from this movie? I'm convinced. I guarantee.
I think definitely. Yeah.
If you were like, hey, what was the main inspiration for that scene of the like, and then we get the Arrested Development reference in that scene as well. So it's like we're mixing classic with modern, but yeah, 100%. The Duke of Wesselton and his ridiculousness is modeled after that scene. I'm convinced.
It is. It's so great.
There's no way it's not. Yeah. And it is, and like this, her story is so similar to Anna's story of like, I just want to like leave this castle. Can we open the gates? Can we have a life?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, it's so similar. So I guarantee that it was an inspiration.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. We covered so much ground. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to get to on this one?
I mean, I just think I can't let this moment pass without kind of just going into some of those basics that I mentioned about how this is a quintessential Swan Maiden tale. And I can keep it brief, but I just
don't go as listen. It's we're an hour into this episode. And if anybody's here now, they're in it. They're in it for the whole thing. And I want you to just go off. I'm going to be as quiet as possible and just let you educate us, because this is why I asked you to come on the podcast.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad, because initially I was going to be like, why do you think I picked this? Because if the answer is because it's a fairy tale and I'm going to tell you how, you're correct. No, I love it because, you know, a few years ago I got super, super into just Swan Maiden stories in general, studying them. It actually did start with on the What the Forest episode about Dark Union, because she was referencing Swan Lake quite a bit in that. Marie Claire was. And so I was like, I want to learn more about this. So then I went down that rabbit hole. And so now it's kind of my shtick. It's my thing. And so I started, and once I started reading about it, this movie was already one of my favorites. It's kind of on my list. Again, it's just one of my sort of comfort movies, if you will. I will pop it in anytime for any reason, just for funsies. And so I was kind of just reading these and I was like, wait a minute, this is Roman Holiday. And then I went back and watched the movie and I was like, oh no, this is beat for beat Roman Holiday. And so what it is a Swan Maiden tale is the story of a enchanted bride who is abducted or captured by a mortal husband. And then the way that the abduction works is either he steals her clothing or animal skin, or he puts his on her. So you can see where we're going with this. But he puts his on her, and that sort of functions as the capture. And now he has captured that, you know, feminine power. It belongs to him now. But eventually she breaks free and she flees and she returns to her world. Now, normally that is framed as some sort of judgment on the mortal husband. But the way that it's done in this story and in some others is it's actually speaking to, it's her story. It's not his story. It's about what she needs. You know, she went to this mortal world and learned these lessons. And then she came back now with additional power that she can now share with her world. And so that is what this story is. And so I really love it because there's a lot of quite specific references. And as I've said before, if you've listened to my conversations with Marie Claire, and especially when we talked on Following Willow, you know, it doesn't have to be deliberate. Do I think that William Wyler or any of the other creatives behind this were like, we're making a Swan Maiden story? No, I don't. I absolutely don't think they're doing that. These are just motifs that crop up when people tell these stories, whether they realize they're doing it or not. So what happens is, you know, he finds her sort of, you know, kind of a little out of it because she's been sedated in Rome and he's concerned for her safety. So he first tries to find a way to get her home. He tries to get her home in a taxi, but she's just too out of it to even tell him where to go or anything. And so eventually he's sort of left with no other option than to take her back to his place. So this is the abduction. He's literally abducted her. But I like that whole scene is also played for laughs. Like, what do you think of the scene where he's sort of trying to get her up the stairs, but she goes around the.
Yeah.
the
It's just there's slapstick, right? And
yes.
that's one of the things. I think that's one of the things that's gonna like define this as a romantic comedy as
Hmm.
opposed to just a romance, right? Is
Yeah.
that we throw in a little bit of the Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin
Yep.
slapstick humor of
Hmm.
like, yeah, she doesn't go up the stairs. It's again, so many moments in this movie where like it got like very genuine laughter out of me,
Yes.
not ironic, not oh silly people in the 1950s, but like that's just a funny situation.
Yeah.
That's
It's
just
so
a hit him
clever.
again and then
Yep.
getting the picture is hilarious.
Yes.
That is a gag that works as well in 2023 as it did in 1953. Like
Exactly.
unbelievable.
Exactly. And that's, a lot of these things, especially to your point, the slapstick physical comedy, like I also really am a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. And it's because
Mm,
to me, a lot of those gags hold up really well.
yeah.
But anyway, to go back to the fairy tale here. So he sort of captures her, but then he comes in and he gives her his pajamas. And so there's two things happening there. One is that she mentioned, not liking her nightgown at the beginning when she's being ordered
Yeah.
around by all the servants and everything, and she mentioned that she would love to wear pajamas, or do you know that there are some people that wear nothing at all and everything. So she's expressing her desire to be free, to kind of throw off this the outer trappings of her imprisonment, and be free. And so he
Yeah.
gets there, he gives her the pajamas, which she was so excited for beforehand, and it's his clothes. So he's now claimed her, he's placed his clothes on her. That is the claiming of the bride.
So good.
Isn't it
It's
cool?
so good because
Yeah.
the nightgown with the little pink roses
Yep.
on it is so like it's so infantilizing, right?
It
And it's the
really is.
symbol
She's like a
of the
child.
fact that yeah,
Hmm.
she's being oppressed by these people. Like she is an
Hmm.
adult, and yet they treat her like she's still a 6-year-old girl,
Yep.
right? And so then we see like it's so clear through the movie of like she starts in that, and then she wears his pajamas, and then later at the end when she's in his robe
Yep.
and he has the line of like it suits you, and she's like I like your clothes seem to, right? Like
Yeah. And
they
he
have that little
says, "You
back and
should
forth.
always wear my clothes." And I
Yeah.
mean, to your point about, you want to talk about, does this movie get sexy? Yes, this movie gets
Oh yeah.
sexy.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Without a sex scene, it's hotter than most
it
movies with
is.
sex scenes.
It is,
I
definitely.
And then when we see her at the end at the press conference, the outfit that she's wearing at the end has like it has a very like feminine but
Hmm.
powerful appeal to it as opposed to what we
Hmm.
saw her at the beginning,
Yep.
which was like sort of your standard like oh she's a princess. And then
Yeah.
at the end it's like oh she looks an awful lot more like a queen now,
Yes,
right?
and but
Like
also, like, she looks more modern. Like,
yeah.
she looks more old-fashioned in those earlier
Yeah.
scenes, like, to your point again, the infantilizing, you could tell she's being dressed by other people. But in that
Yeah.
final scene at the press conference, she's wearing what an extremely modern woman of 1953 would be
Yeah.
wearing.
Yeah.
And, it's a shorter skirt. She's got the little headpiece on, everything. So everything about it makes her,
Yeah.
and obviously she's got her haircut, which we'll get to in a minute, but all of that, so she very clearly has totally grasped her agency in that situation and determined who she's going to be, how she's going to dress, all the decisions that she's going to make. So it's really fantastic. But yeah, so the whole putting your clothing onto the swan maiden to capture her,
Yeah.
and so now she is at that point in time mythically his bride. And then she sleeps in his bed. And wait, what was the thing? Hang on, I feel like there's something I'm missing. But anyway, yeah, it's so, I know what it is. When he realizes who she is and he doesn't want to wake her up because he's trying to charm her, he moves her
Yeah.
from like the chase lounge where he made her sleep to
Yeah.
back to the bed.
Puts her back into the bed.
But he lifts her up
Yeah.
in a bridal carry. So those of you who are
Yep.
looking for bridal carries in the audience, you gotta watch this movie.
I
Have it.
I had a moment when he picks her up and he's got her in the bridal carry, and I was like and like I recognized it,
Yep.
and I recognized the significance of it, and then I recognized why I recognized the significance of it, and I had a moment of like thank you Marie Claire and Missy. I am learning things from you guys on those podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Leo
because
pointing
it
gift
was
right
like
there. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's just really fun because they just beat you over the head with all of the symbolism there. And so then, they go out and they explore the town. We already mentioned how it feels very similar in a lot of ways to Jasmine exploring after she flees the palace.
Yeah.
Very similar circumstances. And they go throughout their day, and you'll notice they actually descend. Like they're on the steps, for instance, and they start to descend the steps. They're not going up, they're going down. And then later, eventually, when they get to the river, they're descending down to the river. They're going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then after they jump into the water, so here's our rebirth symbolism, right? We jump into the water, we come out of the water, and that's when the kiss happens. And that's when both of them suddenly realize, oh, wait, there's more happening here. Oh, no. And so they go back to his place, and we have that whole sequence of, you should always wear my clothes. And in today's, if this movie was made today, that's when they would get it on. And I'm not necessarily opposed to a remake that has that happen. Anyway.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking as I was watching it. I was like, this is where that scene takes place.
Yep.
But because it's 1953 and they are not married, that is impossible, right?
Exactly.
Like at this point in time, we cannot put that in a film. This
Mhm.
movie would be removed and everybody associated would be blacklisted.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. So they can't do, and that said, it's actually also interesting to watch because the kisses are quite long for the time period. They had a time limit for how long the kisses were allowed to be according to the Hays Code at this point in time. So they actually weren't allowed to have kisses longer than a certain amount of time. And I don't remember what the exact limit was, but these are quite long kisses for given that. And so so they really did everything they could to make this a very romantic, very sensual within the limitations of the time period. So it's really cool. But and just other things too, as far as the whole bridal motif. Like we already talked about the scene where he pretends like she's his bride in order to get them out of trouble with the police and everything, and so like they just keep telling you over and over again, oh, they're married. And so then finally we get back to the scene, and they're talking in his room, and there's sort of this unspoken realization that, first of all, they both know who she is. I don't think there's any question that she knows he knows, and they don't talk about it, but it's very obvious that they both realize who she is. And so they're talking about just kind of lightly. She says, oh, I have all these domestic skills. And this is where, again, you have to look at the context, because if you look at it on the surface from a 2023 perspective, you're like, this is so misogynist. She's talking about doing woman's work. No. She's talking about how she has the ability and the inclination to care for someone, to care for her person, but she has no one to care for because that is not her role as the princess, as the monarch. Mm-hmm. And so she tells him that, oh, I can cook and I can sew, I can do all these things. I just don't have anyone to do that for. And he says, well, I guess I'll have to get a place with a kitchen then. And so they're saying that if things were different, they would get married. That's what they're saying. And so they just keep doing over and over again. And even the domestic skills thing, that's also a swan maiden thing. Anytime you have like a false bride and a true bride, a lot of times you can identify the true bride by the fact that she can do certain domestic skills. And again, is that patriarchal? Yes, it is, but it's a major motif. And if you're able to divorce it from its patriarchal context, you can see that it ultimately is simply about caring for your partner. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's about. And you could arguably tell the same story reversing genders or using the same gender, whatever. So
I think it's also a moment of her like this is the beginning of her embracing her own power, right? Mm-hmm. Because the context is that she is in a world where everybody does everything for her. Yep, and exactly. She's turning around to say to him, like, I would like to do everything for someone that I care about. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is her saying, like, I don't like I'm tired of being doted over. I'm tired of being controlled. But in previously it was hysterics, right? As they framed it, it was a tantrum. Yep. And she was like, I'm dying, and buries her face in the pillow and pretends to be dead, which is a very childish way to deal with that. Yes. Right. And then she's gone through this transformation, this rebirth, come out of the water, kissed a man for the first time, mm-hmm. Presumably. And now is saying like, actually, I want to, that power belongs to me, not to them. Mm-hmm. Right. And so like if you like you say, like if you can divorce it from the patriarchal dominator misogyny aspects of it, and just think of it purely from her lived perspective, that's her turning around and saying like I'm done, I'm
Yeah,
done being told what to do, but not from the perspective of a child, from the perspective of an adult,
exactly.
right?
Hmm.
Which is, and also it's so important because she does have a responsibility, she does need to go back to her life
Yeah.
and own that, because the things that she's actually being asked to do are very important things.
Hmm.
If we talk about, especially in the year 2023, we look at the context of this and we look at, she's on a tour in 1953 of Europe to spread the idea that the European Union is a good thing.
Yes, yes. I mean, they don't focus on it much, but that's
Yeah,
what she's actually doing there.
that, yeah, she's actually like on a, like she is what you remember what Princess Leia says she's doing, that she's on an ambassador mission.
Yeah.
That's the sort of princess stuff that Princess Leia is pretending that she's doing, is like, oh,
Yes.
I'm going, and then Vader's like, you're not on any mercy mission, right? And it's like, but
Hmm.
that's what Princess Anne is doing.
Hmm.
She's using her power and influence to try and sway the people into a beneficial situation for everybody, right?
Yes.
Like, which is exactly what the European Union was until, I mean, it continues to be. It's just that now the UK is no longer a part of it.
Right.
But that's so why I say, like, in 2023, this is like, it's like, oh my god, like, look at this, like, she had to do this work. Like,
Yeah.
this was a job, this was work
Hmm.
to go around and get people on board with this.
Hmm. And they were,
And
yeah.
she was just saying it before it was wrote, and then there's a part where she breaks at the end, and she adds her own piece, and they all like look at her of like,
Yeah.
and
They
it becomes
realize it.
personal, right?
Well,
She
especially
understands the actual value of her mission.
because I think it's that moment when they're, again, they're having that sort of very intimate conversation in his room, and you hear the radio, and it updates you on
Yeah.
like, oh, everyone, all of her subjects are so concerned for her safety. She is the sole heir to the throne. She is meant to take over when her father passes away. And so without her, there would be a leadership crisis, oh, what do you call it? Why am I forgetting what it's called? Whatever. Anyway, but there would be, a significant crisis in her homeland. And
Yeah.
so it's very serious for her people if she does not come back. It's very serious for Europe, especially, again, we're talking less than a decade after the end of World War II, when, like, they're still trying to get over some pretty recent wounds at that point and mend that. And so, yeah, the work she's doing is actually quite important in the context. And so you fully understand why it is not an option for her to run away.
Hmm.
It just isn't, and it's that line she has at the end about, were I not completely aware of my duty, I would not have returned today, or indeed ever at all. Like, she makes it
Hmm.
very clear, I wanted to run away, but I know I
Yeah.
can't. So it's a cute, lighthearted movie, but it knows what it's about, and there's a reason why it has the ending that it does, which is the last part of it, by the way, that I wanted to get to, which is that,
Yeah.
so he agrees to drive her back to, again, at this point, there's no secrets, like, he knows he's taking her to the embassy, she knows he's taking her to the embassy, so she goes back to the embassy or the palace or whatever, and they're kind of sitting there in the car, and they have this beautiful romantic moment, but she tells him, I'm going to go over there, I'm going to turn around that corner, and you are not to watch me leave. Well, what's that? That's Orpheus and Eurydice. You cannot turn around and look.
Hmm.
You can't. And he does, of course. He watches her leave, and for a moment you even think he's going to chase after her, because, again, Gregory Peck is amazing, and he just does that whole scene so well. Like, I mean, yeah, watch his face next time you watch that scene. It's
Oh my
incredible.
god.
He's so good.
Yeah.
But so he does, and then again later after the press conference, again he walks away, and then he turns back and looks again. He can't help it. But that's how they use that signal of, like, no, I'm sorry, this loss is permanent. This is not going to be a happily ever after because this is a
Yeah.
lost
Yeah.
bride story, unfortunately. But but it's so well done. It's when you set it up carefully the way they do, when you plan it not because you're trying to your point, pull one over on the audience or anything, but because you're telling a very specific story and it requires this ending, then it works very, very well. So I
Yeah.
find myself, it's bittersweet, yes, but I find myself overall uplifted anytime I finish this movie.
Yeah, there's a there's a quality to films before the 60s that we don't get very often anymore, and it's sincerity, right? I
Absolutely.
I like just that sort of that earnestness
Hmm.
that's in the storytelling. It doesn't come along very often. It's in Star Wars, it's in the first 3 movies. It's even in the prequels, but
Yep.
people just don't understand what the prequels are actually about, so they fail to see it. It's what's missing in the Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker. And
Yep.
I love Force Awakens. Like, that's not a dig on Force Awakens, but
Yeah.
like it is there um in the Last Jedi. But the problem with the Last Jedi is that it's hard to detect because the Last Jedi is subversive to the rest of Star Wars.
Yep.
So like the earnestness that's there is an earnestness that subverts our expectations for what a Star Wars movie is supposed to do.
Hmm.
Um, and so we're supposed to we're supposed to have a level of trust with Ryan's storytelling that we did not have, that I think is in direct response to the fact that the movie before it didn't have earnestness at its
Hmm.
core,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
It was very much like, here are the tropes, here is like, this is a conceit, right? This is a very contrived story to get us back into the world of Star Wars. And
Hmm.
then Ryan comes along and goes, here's a very real story about 2 people.
Yeah.
And everybody got really mad at that because they wanted more of the contrived, let's have references to the old Star Wars movies
Yeah.
again, right?
Yeah. Well,
So like, but that earnestness is like, it's a thing that we lose, um because movies have become so subjective, and because we as a society have become really like cynical and jaded,
hmm.
and they didn't that wasn't the perspective in the 1950s.
Yeah.
That's something that's like came up in the 60s and really in the 70s, and it's what George Lucas was actually like fighting against when he made Star
Yes.
Wars.
Yes.
And people didn't understand why he was making the movie the way that he made it, because every other sci-fi movie was very in on the joke
Yes.
of like the bad special effects, and like, it's like, okay, we know that these giant ants don't look real, but
Hmm.
like, let's pretend that they are for a minute. And
Hmm.
then George comes along and goes, no, Chewbacca's a real thing.
Yeah.
Chewbacca's a Wookiee.
Well,
He's a real person. Like, this isn't a joke. It's not silly.
yeah.
It's not Planet of the Apes. Like, we're not playing this for gags. We're not going to have the monkeys covering their eyes, mouth and
Hmm.
ears, like, in order to poke fun at ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to lock off the camera like we're making a movie in the 1950s.
Hmm. Well, it
We're
tells
very
the story as
like,
if the events are
yeah,
real to the characters.
yeah,
And that I think is what's critical about it is that, like,
yeah,
yes, we, the audience, know that this is not real, but those characters should behave
yeah.
as though everything that's happening to them is real. And
Which is
that's when
what
it works.
yeah, that's what allows you to tell a fairy tale without losing the audience, right?
Exactly.
And that's what Roman Holiday and Star Wars have in common.
Hmm.
I'll always find it. I'll always find the thread.
Yep.
But like, that is what it is. That like, Star Wars is a fairy tale, and so is this, but they don't present on the surface as fairy tales because they're treated as reality,
Yeah. Because for the
right?
characters, it's real. This
Yeah,
is their lives, and we respond to that. We respond to that sincerity, and it just that's why this movie works for me. I think it's why it works for most people. It's actually quite interesting to me that if you look deeper into the critique that is available online of this film and reactions to it and everything, you do see a lot of people who loved it but who dismiss it as like, oh, just a cute little fairy tale. Like, people aren't really
yeah,
understanding why it hits us on that psychological level. And
yeah,
so that's why I enjoy diving into it in this way, is I want to say, okay, no, this is hitting us on a very deep level that that is universal, and this is a very old story that's being told, and that's why it resonates then and now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like fairy tales. It's funny because in modern context, we have Disney
Right.
as the sort of paramount fairy tale
Hmm.
storytellers, right? And so and especially Disney Renaissance, right?
Yes.
Because it in reality, if we're gonna talk about classic Disney, the original fairy tale Disney films, they were not for children; they were
Yep.
for people.
Hmm.
I It wasn't until the 80s that Disney animation became for children,
Hmm.
and like with like the Little Mermaid and the adventurers and
Yep.
you know, like obviously the classic stuff that we grew up with,
Hmm.
that our generation grew up with. And so we have this attitude of fairy tales are the domain of children's stories. But fairy tales, the reason why we tell them to children is because they are easily digestible and understandable in our core, like
Hmm.
in who we are as a society, right?
Yeah.
It's the easiest way to pass those lessons on. No different than the Greek myths were the easiest way to pass on that knowledge and morality at that time, right?
Yep.
Like that's just how we do it, and it's taken on different forms. And nowadays our fairy tales take on the form of, you know, a guy who encases himself in a metal suit in order to protect the people that he loves,
Yep.
or space wizards,
I
right? Like that's
know.
but they're the same thing. They're
Yep.
still fairy tales, and then we just give them these trappings. We call it science fiction,
Hmm.
and we leave the fantasy bit off of the end of that for the most part, when what we're really talking about is morality and you know, like what it means to be a person
And
uh
transformation, usually
yeah,
from childhood to adulthood, because that's what this story
yeah,
is. This is about,
yeah,
the characters going from children to adults. And this is the journey they
yeah,
take.
yeah. Yeah, well, when I say morality, I'm not. It's not even so much about doing like what is right or wrong, which I think is where we usually end up with as morality, which is
Hmm.
the puritanical Christian
Right. Hmm.
version of morality. But when I say morality, it's like being better,
Being
right?
true to
And
yourself. Hmm.
that's what a hero's journey is
Hmm.
about becoming a better version of the person who left the village, right?
Yep.
And that's why it's like this is this is Ty talking through me, because I've just heard her say it so many times. Like the thing that so many of these stories are missing, and MC will say this all the time as well, Marie Claire I should say, is like we're missing the return, right? We
Hmm.
and as a matter of fact, when it's included in stories nowadays, people often get mad at it. I used
Yeah.
to, right? Like I got like the Return of the King at the
Yeah.
end of that
The
movie.
40-minute
The
ending. Yeah.
it has like 15 endings to it. And it's like, well, it has 15 endings to it because there are like 15 characters that we have to check in on, because each of them went on heroes' journeys,
Yep.
and all of them found their own elixirs, and
Yep.
they all brought them back to the places where were meant to be, right?
Hmm.
And it like, so it took that much time. And here's the kicker, guys, there are actually two missing,
Yep.
because Legolas and Gimli don't
Yes.
get their returns at
Hmm.
the end of that movie. There, it's cut out of the story. I actually saw a TikTok the other day that went into it, that like there's a moment where I think I can't remember where they are in Lord of the Rings, but um Legolas and Gimli are with Aragorn, and they get to some place, and they're like, it's like run down,
Hmm.
and Gimli has this moment of like, the stonework here is falling apart. When we're done, I'm gonna get the best stonemasons and the best dwarven artists, and we're gonna fix this place up.
Mm.
And Legolas is like, yeah, and I'm gonna go grab the people from the Southern Wood, and we're gonna come back, and we're gonna return these trees to their glory, and this is gonna be the most beautiful place that anybody's ever seen.
Yep.
And in the book, in the appendices, it's not in the actual book, but in the appendices, it happens.
Yep.
They do that. They both come back, and they bring that back, because they're like, at the end, when this war is done, when we're done fighting,
Hmm.
we like there is no point if we don't leave this world better
Yeah.
than when we started. That's
Yeah.
what we're fighting for. And then they go into the final battle and you have something to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie, the the return for her is just so palpable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was like, that was the moment where I was like, this was a hero's journey, which every good story should be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, not because you sat down and you took the circle and you put it over top of your
And you
story
mapped it. Yeah.
to make sure it's there. But if you are telling a good story, this would be what Joseph Campbell would say about it. It's like, you will find it in there.
Yeah.
It's not a template, it's a byproduct. It happens when you tell a good story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You end up with a hero's journey, and that's exactly what. So what you're saying about like did Weiler actually like put the Swan Maiden story over top of this and go like, that's what
No.
we're doing? Did he put the hero's journey, which we didn't even have that language really yet, it was still being quantified at the time? No, he didn't. He just knew how to tell a good story.
Yeah.
And he knew what good stories there were, and he pulled them into his narrative of what he actually wanted to do, which was take you to Rome and make you fall in love with the city of Rome.
Yeah.
That's what, like, because that's what he was doing. And he was like, how do we do this? What's the package? Well, it's Gregory, Peck, and Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
Right?
This was him returning to post-war Rome and going, I want this audience to see Rome's beauty as I see it. And that's ultimately, and I mean, I'm projecting, of course, but I think that's what this was about. I mean, so Weiler's most famous film is Ben-Hur, which before Titanic held the record for the most Academy Awards. So this guy was one of the heavy hitters of all Hollywood cinema. He I believe he still holds the record for the most nominations for Best Director. And so he was just an absolute powerhouse before and after the war. But he came out of the war and made films that they didn't always have happy endings. Some of them definitely did not. But he came out and he told stories that clearly showed that they were his elixir. That's what he brought back from his experience in the war. So one of the films he made is called The Best Years of Our Lives. It was one of the first films he made after the war, and it featured 3 veterans returning home and trying to integrate back into society after the war, which of course is a very personal story for him. And it's painful, it's tragic, it's beautiful, but it's sad. But this was an important story to tell, and something that was being very much ignored at the time because people just wanted to kind of forget about the war. And then he told this story, which again kind of almost in a way revitalizes the public perception of Rome, which is very important and for reintegrating again, and then eventually tells the story of Ben-Hur. And a number of other films, his whole filmography is exceptional. I haven't seen all of them, but it's very obvious.
It is funny because I think, again, context is like the theme of this episode of Perfect 10, but like I do think that a modern audience loses the perspective that, guys, Italy was part of the Axis.
Yeah, they were the bad guys.
They were the bad guys during World War II. And this is less than 10 years after that. So the perception is still, I mean, like at this point in time, the perception still would have been like, yeah, well, do we trust Italians, right? Like, yeah, would you go to Italy? Would you go to Rome for a vacation? And then, here he is going like, look at this beautiful city. Look at this place. Look at these people.
Yeah, and even Joe, Rome is supposed to be a crap beat that he's on.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the glamorous job that we would consider it today. No. Like, yeah. So that's the thing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm going to ask one more time. Was there anything else that we needed to cover? I think we did it. Like, I think that this was
great.
A fantastic episode.
I'm very happy with this. I'm so delighted that you were willing to watch this movie and talk about it with me. And I always am so delighted anytime someone is willing to let me like yammer on about fairy tales, because it is my favorite thing. But it's such a great movie. I highly recommend it to anyone, who has not seen it. Also do watch 5 Came Back on Netflix. There's also a book if for some reason you don't have Netflix and you would like to read the book. It's supposed to be very good from what I hear.
That's awesome. I mean, like, that's great. I love it when there's always something to like follow up, because if somebody
Mm-hmm.
did watch the movie first or has seen it already but wants to go deeper,
Mm-hmm.
having something like that is a great thing. And also, I mean, like, this is why I do this podcast. Like the whole point of Perfect 10, the whole thesis of it is, I like, a perfect 10 is not an objective thing,
No.
right? I think like there is truth in everything that we've said on this episode, but it is very much a conversation with you about something that you love, and so I as Marie Claire would say, like the purpose is to seek joy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what this podcast is all about. So having you on to talk about something that is so important to you, and I that just happens to be a great film. It's sort of, again, it's like that thing with the hero's journey. It's a byproduct, right? Like the good movie is just I the way that we get to the joy and talking about it for an hour and a half. And so I hope that is like similar to you, that this has made people want to go watch it. Like, this was not really on my radar, except for maybe, I think maybe I've seen you refer to it a few times on Twitter, and that's sort of like when you said it, I was like, okay, all right, this is something that I need to watch. But yeah, if we can, if we can convince even just like one person to go watch this movie, and find just a percentage, a shred of the joy
Mm-hmm.
that you find in it. I mean, like, that's what I was able to do. I love this movie. Like, it's so funny because you ask somebody to talk about their perfect 10, and I so far there has not been a situation where I've been like, oh, what a slog, right?
Yep.
Because you're asking people to like just go into their happy place and invite you along with them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so so you say thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about this, but really, like, thank you for exposing me and the listeners to a movie that I think we probably otherwise would have glossed over, or not even like known existed,
Yeah.
right? Like, just like it just would have sort of fallen away into the endless pit of time.
Mm-hmm.
I Because every year that goes by, it gets further and further in the past.
Absolutely.
But to have a reason to watch it, and then a great conversation like this to contextualize it and talk about, why it's important. It almost feels like analyzing Shakespeare in a way.
I
I
like to think of it
which
that
is
way.
which is one of my favorite pastimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was just, this episode was a delight. This was so much fun. I hope everybody else enjoyed listening. I'm really, really interested. So I don't talk about it a lot on the podcast, except for sometimes in the preamble. But Tim Dipple will now have the task of going and creating a 10-question trivia quiz
Ooh,
for our Patreon
nice.
supporters, about this movie, which I will be surprised if he's seen. And so I expect that he'll do his homework. He's got a couple of weeks to do it, so I expect that he'll do his homework and watch it, and do a little bit of research himself. And yeah, because he doesn't hear the episodes before he records, like before he writes his trivia questions,
Oh,
and it
interesting.
is always so wonderful to find out when I get the file from him and I listen to it, and I hear all of the question, and it's like, we talked about that, we talked about that, we talked about that, we talked about that. Like, and it's like, so the answers to the trivia questions are almost always in the episode,
That's so
and
cool.
it's always purely serendipitous, and I never want that to change. I'm never going to give him the episode before he writes his trivia questions, because as long as we keep that streak, then I know we're making magic. Like,
Nice.
that's so that's my little pitch for everybody to go over to patreon.com/ThunderQuack, and it's the $10 level that gets that. Here's the thing. I kind of want to move them down to the $5 level because not enough people are getting to hear them at the $10 level, because obviously the higher the tiers go, the less people support at that level. And he does such a good job that I feel like it should be exposed to the rest of the world. But go over to Patreon, support us over there.
Do it.
And get that, which will be out. It'll be out the same day that the episode releases to the general audience. But if you're a Patreon supporter, you'll be listening to this episode of Perfect 10 on the Tuesday before it releases on Friday. But on the Friday, they both go live. One on podcast feeds and the other one on Patreon. So, before we close it out, I kind of did a little bit of my rigmarole. I should have given you this opportunity first. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to get more of this fairy tale goodness?
So right now you can find me mostly on Tumblr at All Girls Are Princesses. The truth is I do still bob around on Twitter, but I'm trying to pull back again because I just don't like what the Muskrat is doing. So I'm mostly just going to promote Tumblr for now, and I am pretty active there. So.
Awesome. I'll also just remind everybody that they can go listen to a whole slew of episodes of What the Force that feature Missy. And if anybody ever asks me, this is what I say. It's like, if somebody's like, where do I get started with that? It's like any episode with Ty or Missy as the guest, you're good. Any of the myth and symbolism stuff, any of the hero's journey stuff with you guys is just like, that's the reason why I listen to the podcast. And then obviously Marie Claire is a genius as well. The three of you are like my you're like my spirit guides through the world of like femme gaze. Like it's I've learned so much and become a better person, I hope. I don't know, ask my wife, but a better person, I hope, by virtue of the lessons that I learned listening to you guys talk. So this is my opportunity. Like I had one on the recent episode of What the Force where I got to gush about Marie Claire and how amazing she is, to tell you on a podcast in front of the whole podcast listening audience that you are also amazing. And I look forward to any content that you put out.
Well, thank you so much. It's really nice. It's sometimes we just seem to be squealing into the void, so it's nice. Thank you.
No, this guy at least is very appreciative for the squealing, and will encourage you to never stop. Never stop.
I will do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Missy, for joining me.
Thank you.
And I will be back in 4 weeks with another episode. I actually think it might be Marie Claire and I talking about Stardust, because she really wants to do that episode.
Do it.
So I think that might be the next one. If not, the backup will be Kyle and I talking about Rings of Power, and kind of just, I mean, like that'll end up being a conversation about Lord of the Rings in general, but we're going to kind of focus it around Rings of Power. So look forward to those coming soon, and obviously go to ThunderQuack and check out all the other podcasts. Rebel Cells is going right now for Bad Batch, and Force Perspective should have another episode out soon about Willow, before we get into Mando, which is at this point, like, oh my goodness, are we like 2 weeks out?
It's close.
From Mando? I think it's like 2 weeks from Wednesday, right? 2 or 3. So yeah, our Mando recaps will be coming back with Joe and I on that. So go check out those podcast feeds as well and get subscribed. Again, thank you, Missy, for joining me. And thank you everybody for listening. And we'll catch you on the next episode. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohen. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 Pop Quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.